Answered in kind, 74. If they will not hear your truth. There is a peculiar thing that happens to the human mind when it feels uncertain about the world. It reaches for certainty, not quiet certainty, the kind that grows slowly like a tree beside a river, but loud certainty, the kind that must be declared again and again, almost as if the declaration itself were meant to hold something fragile together. You can usually tell the difference. The quiet certainty of a person at peace rarely needs to repeat itself. But when someone must repeat a position 20 times, quote it, defend it, proclaim it, announce it, reinforce it, and ask others to confirm it, what you are often witnessing is not conviction, but anxiety wearing the clothing of conviction. And anxiety, when it dresses itself as righteousness, becomes a very noisy thing. It begins to circle around a single subject, like a moth around a lantern, again and again and again. Because somewhere beneath the arguments, beneath the proclamations, beneath the certainty, there is an inner turbulence that has not yet been understood. And so the mind attempts to stabilize itself by building a wall made of words. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. If you read the Gospels carefully, you will notice that the people most obsessed with moral categories were rarely the ones who were most at peace. The teachers of the law in the time of Jesus Christ were deeply concerned with identifying who was clean and who was unclean, who was righteous and who was sinful, who belonged and who did not. And yet, something very interesting happens in those stories. Whenever these moral debates appear, the teacher does something strange. He shifts the focus. Someone says, "Who is righteous?" And he tells a story about mercy. Someone says, "Who is allowed?" And he tells a story about compassion. Someone says, "Who deserves condemnation?" And he bends down and writes in the dust. The pattern is unmistakable. Whenever the conversation becomes obsessed with drawing boundaries around sin, the teacher redirects attention toward the condition of the heart, because the heart is the real battlefield. Not the category, not the label, not the social argument, the heart. You see, there is something psychologically fascinating about moral fixation. When a single issue becomes the center of a person's religious identity, it often tells us less about the issue and more about the inner structure of the person holding it. Human beings tend to project their internal conflicts outward. If someone is wrestling with fear, they may become obsessed with control. If someone is wrestling with shame, they may become obsessed with purity. If someone is wrestling with uncertainty, they may become obsessed with rules. And none of this necessarily means the person is malicious. Quite often, it means they are frightened. Not frightened in an obvious way, but frightened in the quiet, subterranean way that exists beneath conscious thought. The kind of fear that says, if the world becomes too ambiguous, I will not know where I stand. So, the mind creates a clear line. On one side, righteousness. On the other, sin. And then it guards that line like a fortress. But here is the difficulty. Life rarely respects such simple borders. Human beings are complex. Pain is complex. Identity is complex. And the deeper one looks into the human condition, the more one begins to realize that nearly everyone is carrying something heavy that others cannot see. Some carry loneliness. Some carry rejection. Some carry confusion. Some carry the quiet ache of not feeling understood. And sometimes, the loudest voices in moral debates are not the most secure ones, but the most wounded ones. Now, there is another pattern that appears in religious discourse. It is the attempt to combine condemnation with reassurance, to say something that wounds, and then quickly follow it with the language of love. You are wrong, but I love you. You are condemned, but you are loved. And psychologically, this produces a strange emotional contradiction, because love that is paired with rejection does not feel like love to the person receiving it. It feels like a riddle. It feels like being told, you are embraced, but only if you become someone else. Now, again, this does not mean the speaker intends harm. Very often, they are sincerely trying to reconcile two ideas they have been taught. One idea tells them they must defend moral truth. Another tells them they must show compassion. So they try to do both at once. But when these two impulses are not integrated inwardly, the result can feel less like compassion and more like judgment wearing a friendly mask. And the listener senses the tension immediately, not because people are overly sensitive, but because human beings are exquisitely sensitive to emotional coherence. We can feel when a person's words and inner state are aligned, and we can feel when they are not. Now, there is something else happening beneath many of these conversations that is worth noticing. Loneliness. A great many people in modern society feel spiritually isolated. They feel unsupported, unheard, disconnected. So they seek belonging in a community that offers certainty. A community where the rules are clear, where identity is stable, where the world is divided into simple categories: good, bad, right, wrong, inside, outside. And this kind of structure can be comforting, but it can also create an unintended side effect. The more tightly a group defines its boundaries, the more its members may feel responsible for defending those boundaries publicly, because if the boundaries blur, the belonging feels threatened. And when belonging feels threatened, the nervous system reacts. That reaction often appears as moral urgency, but psychologically, it is closer to identity defense. The person is not merely arguing an idea. They are protecting the structure that gives their world stability. And so the conversation becomes very intense, very repetitive, very absolute. Now, what is the response to such intensity? Many people choose argument, debate, counterattack, humiliation. But interestingly, these responses almost never change anyone's mind. Because when a person feels attacked, their nervous system does not move toward reflection. It moves toward defense. Walls rise higher. Positions become more rigid. The fortress grows thicker. Which brings us back to the teacher again. Notice how rarely Jesus Christ actually argued people out of their beliefs. Instead, he spoke in stories, parables, questions, moments of unexpected gentleness. He did something very psychologically sophisticated. He lowered the temperature of the conversation. Because when the emotional temperature drops, the mind becomes capable of curiosity again. And curiosity is the doorway through which transformation enters. Not humiliation, not defeat, curiosity. So what do we do when someone cannot hear us? When every attempt at conversation turns into a wall? When every explanation becomes another argument? There is an ancient piece of wisdom that suggests a surprising answer. You answer them in kind, but not in the way people usually mean that phrase. You do not mirror their hostility. You mirror the deeper thing they are searching for beneath the hostility. If they are seeking certainty, you respond with calm. If they are seeking validation, you respond with dignity. If they are seeking belonging, you respond with humanity. Because very often the person shouting the loudest about moral order is secretly hoping someone will show them a deeper kind of grace than the one they know how to offer. And sometimes the most powerful response is not persuasion. It is peace, not agreement. Peace. A presence that refuses to escalate. A presence that refuses to humiliate. A presence that quietly demonstrates that love is larger than the argument. This does not mean abandoning truth. Truth does not need shouting to survive. Truth has an unusual property. It tends to reveal itself slowly, like dawn, but only to those who are not too busy defending the night. So if someone cannot hear your truth today, do not despair. Human beings rarely change in the middle of arguments. They change later, in silence. When something they heard weeks earlier returns to them unexpectedly. When a moment of kindness contradicts what they expected. When the mind finally becomes quiet enough to ask a new question. And that question is often the beginning of wisdom. So if they will not hear your truth, live it. Because lived truth travels further than spoken truth ever could. And sometimes, the gentlest light is the only light that eventually reaches the heart.